Hello, and welcome to Its Continuing Mission, where another Star Trek devotee spends too long talking about the ongoing impact that Star Trek has on the world and the people in it, or at the very least, on themselves. I'm Ollie, your host and captain on this exciting voyage, and today we are discussing the problem of Neelix. For those who don't know, probably don't listen to this episode, I guess, but I'll still fully introduce this character for those who may need a refresher. Neelix is a main character on Star Trek Voyager. He is a native of the Delta Quadrant where the ship is stranded, a Talaxian with somewhat spotted skin and a yellowish mohawk. His demeanor is almost invariably cheerful, which matches the complexion and voice of his actor, Ethan Phillips. Though he was a space trader to start, when he decided to join the crew of the Voyager, he appointed himself chef and a morale officer. Janeway allowed him to stay on board, believing that he would serve as a navigator for and liaison to the Delta Quadrant, which was completely unfamiliar to her and anyone else on board. And that's where the problem of Neelix begins. You see, he wasn't a very good navigator or liaison. His familiarity with the region contributed at most an idea of which people were dangerous, which people were cool, and which people didn't like each other. That's good information to have, but his warnings didn't stop Voyager from encountering perils or enemies like the Kazon, the Vidians, or the Hirogen. Presumably, an experienced captain in an unfamiliar place far from allies would act with caution regardless of the limited guidance a local trader could provide. The writers tried to solve this in Season 3, Episode 13, Fair Trade. In this episode, Neelix suffers a crisis of identity when Voyager, less than halfway through the series, ventures beyond where Neelix had traveled as a trader. This episode, as well as the episode before it when Neelix was jokingly promoted to ambassador, was meant to sort of reset his character. His previous purpose was retired, but they didn't give him a new one. At least not firmly, as his duties as an ambassador were limited at best. While I can see the potential for his character in the setting we found ourselves in, Voyager was too competent a crew to actually need him. Ultimately, I think that in the shadow of characters with much clearer skills and purposes, Neelix failed to fulfill the role that he was initially written for. Unfortunately, that meant the writers couldn't do much with him. He quickly became nothing more than a comic relief, which is not a character type that can support many episodes focused entirely on him. So, if Neelix couldn't contribute in the role he was assigned at really any point in the series, what purpose did he actually serve? Any Star Trek show is incomplete without an outsider, someone to illuminate interesting truths about humanity through contrast or through longing. These are your Spocks, your Datas, your Odos, your T'Pols, all of whom, through their ongoing interactions with humans, become more human themselves. These characters remind us that we're all on the same journey, and they help us stay on track. At first glance, Neelix seems like he would fit that role. He's one of only 2 non-human, non-Federation members of Voyager's crew. But the role was already filled by much richer characters. The Doctor, someone who wanted to become more human, B'Elanna, a Maquis learning to be Federation, and Seven of Nine, a Borg rediscovering humanity. There was never any room for Neelix in this role. So what else is there? Well, he was a chef, but not a good one. He was Kess's boyfriend, but not a good one. He was Naomi Wildman's godfather and babysitter, and that's where he finally settled in for real. That role allowed him to show some emotion, have a few moments of learning and growth, but still held him back as a character. When your character is tied to a child, your role naturally becomes more childlike. He could never really mature, and the themes he delivered could never go beyond what a child would understand. The only important role that Neelix truly had on Voyager was as the Optimist. He had a unique personality that stood out from the other characters, allowing him to change the tone of certain scenes and keep a darker show from getting too dark at times. And that's the problem of Neelix. He was less of a character and more of a vibe, and a vibe can't often lead memorable scenes or episodes. In conclusion, he was deadweight and freaking annoying. But Neelix's problems don't end there. I mentioned earlier that Neelix is the boyfriend of a much cooler and more interesting character, Kes. One of the interesting things about Kes is that she's an Okampa, which means her lifespan is much shorter compared to humans. I'm so sorry if this is how you're finding out, but Kes is less than 2 years old. Now, she is an alien, and her body is that of an adult humanoid, so maybe we shouldn't be too quick to judge. Except Season 2, Episode 4, Elogium. It was not a great episode overall, with a weak and confused thematic message, but that's not important to our discussion. What we need to focus on is that Kess, impacted by some alien hullabaloo, undergoes her elogium. In other words, her mating cycle. This is a process that only happens once to an Okampa, usually around 4 or 5 years old. Though this is definitively a mating cycle, some critics liken the process to a kind of puberty. This is concerning because it would mean that Kess is essentially underage in a long-established romantic relationship with a character whom she kisses. They have separate bedrooms, but that doesn't exactly negate wrongdoing. Furthermore, Kess is characterized by her innocence and her childlike wonder. Even her relationships with her mentors, Tuvok and Janeway, have almost parent-child connotations. And let's not forget, she's almost 2. We've been with her a year already. And she was dating Neelix before we even met them. Neelix is probably not a pedophile, but he probably is a groomer. I don't think this necessarily casts a dark shadow on his relationship with Naomi. After all, the Okampa life cycle was meant just to be a simple science fiction element, and it's possible no one even thought of Neelix when assigning an interesting trait to Kess. But they definitely thought of Kess when assigning Neelix the trait of obsessively jealous. So I still must maintain that Neelix is not just a problem, he's problematic. I'm sorry if he's your favorite character. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Its Continuing Mission. I hope you'll come back to explore more of the familiar old world of Star Trek with me soon.